Hello, second grade. This week's story again comes to you from Scotland, and I will be reading the story of the Hedgehog's Race. It's a little bit longer than last week's story, so I'll probably be looking at the book a bit more. Okay, well, every morning, very early, old Mr. Brown Hare came down from his bed in the hillside. He was bound for the farmer's field because his breakfast was turnips. He loved the young turnips coming up. But this one morning, bright and early, as old Mr. Hare came popping down the hillside, a beautiful sunny morning, the first person that he met along the way was old Mr. Hedgehog. He was crawling around the hedgerows hunting for his breakfast because, you know, hedgehogs like to eat slugs and worms and little creatures. Because Mr. Hare was feeling very frisky this morning, he decided to have a little fun with Mr. Hare. So when he came down to the gate leading to the farmer's field, old Mr. Hedgehog, of course, sat up with his wee pointed nose and his little short legs. And old Mr. Hare said, "Good morning, short legs." Now, hedgehogs are very sensitive about their short legs. And they don't like it very much when somebody talks about them because their legs really are very short. He said, "You know, my friend Mr. Hare, you are not a very nice person." "And why?" said old Mr. Hare. "Am I not a nice person?" "Well," he said, "every time we meet, you're always talking about my legs. And I can't help it that I've got short legs because I was just born like this." Mr. Hare said, "Wouldn't you like to have long legs like me? You know, I've got beautiful legs. I can run faster than anyone. Dogs can't even catch me. Wouldn't it be nice if your legs were like mine and you could run as fast as the wind, just like me?" Old Mr. Hedgehog said, "Well, of course it would be nice to have long legs like you. But you see, Mr. Hare, you don't need long legs to run fast." "What? You don't need long legs to run fast?" said Mr. Hare. "Nonsense! How in the world could you run fast with those short little legs that you've got? No way could you run out of the way of a dog or a fox like me. As for me, I can run swifter than the wind." "Well," said old Mr. Hedgehog, "you see, my friend, I'll tell you what I'll do with you. I'll make a bargain with you. I'll challenge you to a race." And old Mr. Hare cocked up his ears and said, "Am I hearing you right? You mean you're challenging me to a race?" "Of course," said old Mr. Hedgehog. "Are you getting deaf in your old age? I said a race." "You want to race me?" said Mr. Hare. "Yes, I want to race you. I want to prove to you once and for all that even though I've got short legs, I can run faster than you." "Never," said old Mr. Hare. "No way could you run faster than me." "Well," said old Mr. Hedgehog, "would you like to prove it?" "Of course," said old Mr. Hare, rubbing his paws in glee. "This is going to be fun. I'd love to prove it." "Well," said old Mr. Hedgehog, "tomorrow morning at this gate I will meet you, and I will race you to the foot of the 5-acre field. And I'll race you back again, and I will beat you. Will you promise me one thing?" said old Mr. Hedgehog. "Anything," said old Mr. Hare. "Anything. I will promise you anything." "Well, promise me that you'll never call me short legs again as long as you live." Old Mr. Hare said, "Look, if you want to race me, I'll race you, and then I'll beat you like you've never been beaten all your life, and I'll go so fast you will never even see me pass by. And after I beat you, I will go on calling you short legs all the days of your life." "Well," said old Mr. Hedgehog, "we'll just have to wait and see." "Done," said old Mr. Hare. "Tomorrow morning at daybreak, I'm going to teach you a lesson that you will never forget." "Well," said old Mr. Hedgehog, "we'll just have to wait and see. But remember now, Mr. Hare, I'll be here." "Oh," said Mr. Hare, "I'll be here." And like that, off went Mr. Hare for his breakfast of turnips in the farmer's field. But what do you think old Mr. Hedgehog did? He toddled away back to his home where his wife was waiting. And old Mrs. Hedgehog greeted him. And he said, "My dear, would you do something for me?" course, said old Mrs. Hedgehog. She loved her old husband, Mr. Hedgehog, very much. She said, Husband, I'll do anything for you. And he said, You see, my dear, I've challenged Mr. Hare to a race. And she said, What? Husband, what have you done? Are you crazy? Have you gone out of your mind? No, my dear, I've not gone crazy. But if you will agree to help me, with your help, I will teach old Mr. Hare a lesson. She said, What do you want me to do, husband? Well, he said, it's so simple. You know how old Mr. Hare thinks he's very clever? Well, he's not as clever as he thinks he is. Because like everyone else, he doesn't know you from me. And neither do most of us, because you see, if you were to meet a Mr. and a Mrs. Hedgehog, you wouldn't know one from the other either. Well, she said, Husband, what do you want me to do? And he said, My dear, all I want you to do is, I want you to wait till daybreak. I will wait at the top of the gate till Mr. Hare comes down from the hillside, from his bush, and I will challenge him to a race, but I'm not going to run any of it, and neither are you. I want you to wait at the foot of the field. And when old Mr. Hare comes down to the foot of the field, all you will have to do is just stand up and say, I'm here before you. And I will wait up at the top of the gate, and I won't move. Silly old Mr. Hare will never know you from me. So the plan was made. That night, after giving his old wife, Mrs. Hedgehog, a little cuddle, off she went. And she wandered away down to the foot of the field. And there she waited. It was summertime, so the nights were not very long. And of course, old Mr. Hare was very bright in the morning. He liked to be up early, 4:30 when the sun came up. So old Mr. Hedgehog, he crawled away to the gate, and there he waited. He never looked for a worm. He never looked for a snail. He just waited for Mr. Hare. But as soon as the sun began to rise, down came Mr. Hare, so proud of himself. He was going to show old Mr. Hedgehog this morning how to run, like he'd never run before in all his life. And then he was going to go on calling him Shortlegs every time they met, see, and many other things for bys. Slow coach and things like that. So when Mr. Hare came to the gate, there sat old Mr. Hedgehog. He said, Good morning, Shortlegs, are you ready? Of course, Mr. Hedgehog, who was very sensitive about his short legs, said, You promised you wouldn't call me Shortlegs anymore. He said, Of course I promised you, but after the race. You've not beaten me yet. And you don't have one single chance in this world. I'm going to beat you this morning because I feel so frisky, and I'm going to show you what it's like to run. After I beat you, I'm going to go on calling you Shortlegs all your life, and many other things for bys. Well, said old Mr. Hedgehog, thinking to himself, she'll be at the bottom of the field by this time. He was happy. And he said, Okay, Mr. Hare, are you ready? And Mr. Hare said, As ready as I'll ever be. He rubbed his paws together and said, 1, 2, 3, off we go. And old Mr. Hare, off he flew down to the field, faster than he'd ever run. Old Mr. Hedgehog sat there and watched him running like he'd never run before in his life. But he was in for a big surprise, because when he came to the foot of the field, there in front of him was old Mrs. Hedgehog. And she said, I'm here before you. As quick as light, old Mr. Hare turned, and up he ran back to the field as fast as he could. But on the way up, he ran faster. And when he came to the top of the field, there was old Mr. Hedgehog. And he said, I'm here before you. Quick as light, old Mr. Hare turned again, and down the field he ran faster than he ever ran before. And when he came to the foot of the field, there was old Mrs. Hedgehog again. And she said, I'm here before you. And then he ran back again, up the field, as fast as he could run. And there was Mr. Hedgehog, and he said, I'm here before you. So up and down ran old Mr. Hare, till at last he was completely exhausted. He could not run another step. He came up to the top of the field, and he was lying there. His tongue was hanging out, and he was panting. And he said, Tell me, Mr. Hedgehog, tell me, please, how in the world did you ever do it? You ran so fast, I never even saw you pass me. Of course, said old Mr. Hedgehog, I told you wouldn't believe me, that you don't need long legs to run fast. Well, said old Mr. Hare, you really beat me there, and I'm still not sure how you did it, but I promise you, my friend, that I will never call you short legs again as long as I live. And that's why today, if you're up in the gorse hills, in the woods, you will find hedgehogs and hares asleep together in the same bush because they are very good friends. And as for old Mr. Hare, he never called Mr. Hedgehog short legs again. I miss you.